Canada, Party President of the local Victoria Union of Postal Workers. I was wondering what your position is on the government's announcement that there will be cutting up to 8,000 jobs in Canada.
Good job, actually.
Yeah, the situation for Canada Post is extremely worrying. I think you know where I stand. The CUPW research has been very strong in showing that if we want to maintain our postal service, we have to be prepared to be creative, and we have to look for ways to diversify the functions of our post offices, including doing what they do in some countries of opening up postal service to include banking service. There are a lot of things we can do to ensure that the postal service maintains its profitability. But the reality is it's still making money now, and although letter carrying and letter delivery to a door has gone down, because of the advent of internet shopping, parcel delivery is going up. So we could absolutely, and I think it's a minimum service myself of a civilized society, that you can mail a letter to anywhere in the country. And the idea that this is a concern for seniors who want to get more exercise climbing over snowbanks to get to these, and in much of Canada, the idea that urban service of mail delivery is going to be changed so dramatically with no discussion, and the morning after we adjourned, I'm appalled by. Let me just get a sense of the room, because sometimes I hear that people don't care. How many of you are upset by the changes that were recently announced? Great. How many of you think we don't need a post office service in Canada and we can all go with private mail delivery? And okay. Okay, good. So we have a sense of the room. So we'll just keep working on it. I think most Canadians are quite distressed by it.
Okay. I just want to add that I have letters that you can mail to your member of Parliament, Stephen Harper. They're free postage, and I have copies here, and I also have a petition, and we have a rally downtown the day Parliament resumes on January 27th at the Post Office on Yates.
What time is the rally?
At noon.
Post office rally at noon on Yates a week from today, January 27th.
Thank you.
I'll be there in spirit, I'll be in Ottawa in reality. Okay, on the aisle there.
Very soon, as you know, and I think many people know, there will be the upcoming hearings for the Trans Mountain Pipeline, the Kinder Morgan shipments, and Saanich Gulf Islands is part of the ground zero of the vastly increased tanker traffic. I guess I wonder, first, is it appropriate that a member of Parliament may or may not apply to be an intervener in this process? And also, I kind of wonder, you would know principles among the Organization of Islands Trust. I wonder if you anticipate that Islands Trust will be and then the shout out is, we have only until February 12th if anyone chooses to apply to present or submit a letter to the hearing. But I wonder what
I'm planning to, did the question carry? Okay, Trans Mountain, the Kinder Morgan Pipeline project, they opened up very recently, January 18th, I believe. There were full-page ads saying you can apply to be an intervener at the National Energy Board review of the expanded capacity of bitumen diluent shipments out of Burnaby and through the Port of Vancouver. And of course, it is very much closer to us if that tanker traffic expands. It's very close to Saanich Gulf Islands. We only have till February 12th, so it's less than a month, for the window to apply to become an intervener. So the question the gentleman asked me was, is it appropriate for me to apply to be an intervener? Do I plan to? Will Islands Trust intervene? And just to make sure people here know about this very narrow deadline. I've already gone on the National Energy Board website. It's not an easy process, so I've started the process of giving myself every time I get a few seconds, I'll go back. But I plan to get myself registered, and then I'm interested to know if they will accept me as an intervener. Because we're back to Bill C-38, where they repealed the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act and put in place a bogus act on environmental assessment, which leaves out public participation, essentially. It says that you can participate if you're directly affected. The previous Environmental Assessment Act, which I helped work on back in the Mulroney years, which got ultimately royal assent right after Chrétien came in, but that was the window in which we were working on good environmental assessment legislation. And by the way, it was never all that good, but it was a lot better than before Harper took an axe to it. But what it used to have as a fundamental foundational pillar of federal environmental assessment in Canada was to encourage public participation. And now they've drawn it into a very tight narrowing of scope that says you have to be directly affected to participate in the hearings. Now, the legal jurisprudence around directly affected is usually taken to mean such a thing as you live next door. Directly affected is a very narrow form of words. And there have been challenges already at the Line 9 review. This was the first one. It's the reversal of Line 9 in Ontario to begin to move products west to east instead of east to west along this length of Enbridge pipe that goes between Ontario and Quebec. A lot of people have found they can't get in to participate because of this new definition of directly affected. Forest Ethics, by the way, hired Clayton Ruby to go to court to challenge it in relation to Line 9. Depending on when that court case finishes, that could have some implications for the way they're applying it on Kinder Morgan. I plan to see how far I can take it. I also wanted to go through the experience personally of getting through the forms because they're somewhat daunting. But I encourage everybody here who's concerned about pipelines and tankers to go to the National Energy Board website. I think from memory, I think it was NEB-ENO, Énergie Nationale Organisation, je pense. Anyway, so or you could just Google National Energy Board Kinder Morgan and find your way to their website. See if you can register, see if they'll let us participate. Yes, you were the next one.
I know a lot of discussion about Senate recently has been to do with scandals, so totally ignoring all the idea of scandals. Before that, I was studying through something about Senate reform. So what, if anything, is being done about Senate reform?
So the question is about the Senate and about what we hear about as scandals, but what's being done about Senate reform. The difficulty with Senate reform, as opposed to the suite of things we've talked about so far for parliamentary reform, I've left out one of the important things of parliamentary reform, for instance, getting rid of the first past the post voting system, having proportional representation, eliminating the Prime Minister's office. I'd love to eliminate it, you know? If it just didn't have any money, if it was just filled with earnest volunteers, I wouldn't mind so much, you know? But anyway, but the Senate, all of the things that we need to do to fix the House of Commons can be done without opening the Constitution. So the big hurdle on Senate reform is you can do almost nothing in the Senate without the consent of most provinces, and you have to go through the exercise of opening the Canadian Constitution, which is fraught with risks because once you open that negotiation, who knows where else it will lead. It's hard to just keep it focused on only the Senate. In terms of Senate reform, personally, I was always a defender of the Canadian Senate, just from my experience of working with the Senate when it was a good place. Now, it was never perfect. You always had some lazy hangers-on who took the money and hung out in Mexico, but or people who seemed to be on life support. But I mean, not to make fun of them, but really, the bulk of senators historically have been good. The work of the Senate historically has had real merit because you had people who weren't worried about winning at the next election. So you had things like, I don't know how many of you have ever been interested in soil erosion, but one of the landmark reports ever done in Canada was done by a senator named Herb Sparrow from Saskatchewan, whose committee wrote a landmark report on soil erosion. And then there was the bovine growth hormone, recombinant DNA, so a genetically modified drug for cows, which they use in the States, to increase milk production. The only reason it's not registered in Canada is that the Canadian Senate held hearings and subpoenaed the scientists who thought it was a bad idea and made it impossible for the Minister of Health to approve it. Monsanto at that point, by the way, had offered the Chrétien Minister of Health at the time, Alan Rock, the Department of Health in Canada had been offered a $10 million research grant from Monsanto if we registered bovine growth hormone. The only reason it wasn't registered was because of the Canadian Senate. So there was a role for sober second thought. But back to what's gone wrong in Parliament, the PMO now believes it can control senators. And this has become very transparent through the wonderful, interesting reading 80-page affidavit of the RCMP looking into the spending scandal has opened a little bit of a window on how people in PMO are saying, these senators, they're giving speeches they wrote themselves. They're not even clearing their speeches. So there's this sort of a fit happening where the spin doctor guys in PMO realize that the Senate, from their point of view, the Senate has gone rogue. They don't understand that it's a separate house of governance, separate from the House of Commons, therefore nothing to do with the PMO controlling them. But Harper has appointed, and it's hard to generalize because there may be a good senator in the mix, so I apologize for offending anyone. But basically, the independent thought, the policy excellence, the potential for people actually doing a good job in the public interest in the Canadian Senate has plummeted, given the appointments Harper has made. So now I've actually moved to Senate abolition, personally, because I'm terrified that, well, what these guys have done with the climate bill that Bruce Heyer brought in, it was passed by the House of Commons when the House was a minority, conservative-dominated House, with Harper as Prime Minister, a minority parliament. A bill was passed for climate action, got through the House of Commons, and when it got to the Senate, Harper told conservative senators, take your first opportunity and kill it. They killed a bill with no legitimacy, not elected people. They killed a bill passed by the democratically elected House. They killed it before it ever went to committee for study. So right now, I think the only way to clean up the Senate, and it's almost impossible to fire a senator. The conservative-dominated Senate is going to be a real problem, and I don't know how we're going to reform it unless we open the Constitution. So I think the priority has to be on reforming the House of Commons. If we could reform the Senate, I think you'd almost do better to say, let's find a mechanism to fire all existing senators, and then just have a lotto, and like a jury duty, and a whole bunch of regular people would have to go to the Senate, and they would do a better job. But I'm not being, the Senate reform issue is a big one, but it's almost impossible to fix in real political terms because you have to open the Constitution to fix it. I'm sorry it took so long to answer that.